what is your view? Is there a soul that exists, or no, those are just wrong beliefs?
Yeah, I don't believe in soul, but I have a moral code and compass, and that seems to operate just fine.
But doesn't that make us so insignificant? Like,
yeah, and isn't that? And I find beauty in that.
how?
Oh, because I think that for me, as in, yeah, so the idea of a soul that in fact is somehow special to us as people, and then keeps us separate from essentially the rest of the natural world. In a way, I can see how that's an alluring idea, but I don't actually find that sense of separation from the natural world all that comforting. And yeah, if there's no soul and nothing that then makes, it's not my soul that makes me different from you or special. It's actually just our different histories that whatever led to us being here today. I find the latter more interesting. As in, the idea that I am whatever, just occupying a certain space for a certain time, and that the world will go on without me. I don't know. I find comfort.
Today we were joined with Dr. Nathan Holmes. He's from the School of Psychology at UNSW and also a leading expert in research about attention, learning and memory. We talk about a lot of things with him, such as free will. What does it mean to be conscious? Welcome to Unwinding Curiosity. Enjoy the podcast. Dr. Nathan, thank you for coming to the podcast today.
G'day. You can call me Nathan.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
So Nathan, before we start the podcast, can you tell us what is neuroscience and how does philosophy connect into it?
Yeah, wow, big questions for the start. Okay. Look, the neuroscience comes in many forms, but for me and what I do, so I'm interested in studying brain behaviour relations, and so I'm in an area of behavioural neuroscience, so interested in brain behaviour relations. And I guess for me, where I'm obviously conducting my work in an area, or in the Faculty of Science and in the School of Psychology here at UNSW. And so, that's a scientific discipline, and there's a philosophy of science that stands behind all the work that we do. But more generally, in terms of brain behaviour relations, there's also something called the mind that sometimes people, there's questions of mind that are also of interest.
Right.
And so philosophical questions of mind and how they then, relate to the sorts of psychological questions of behaviour is, I guess, how those two things stand side by side, at least for me.
So brain has this unique ability of making us feel unique. Like, it kind of makes us separate from the whole world. Like, we are the same atoms, and these atoms are spread all around the universe. So why do you think brain gives us this special ability to separate ourselves and feel unique?
Well, I guess the one way of answering is to say, well, because we are. As in, because your brain and my brain, while whatever, wired perhaps genetically in the same way, you're a product of your unique experiences, as am I. And so many of our experiences are probably common. We both are occupying this common space now, and so we have a lot of shared history. But there'll also be quite different things that have been stamped into your brain that make you you, and different things that are stamped into my brain that make me me. And so in a way, that's it. The brain is. I'm about to read from the first line of grants that we usually write about memory. And so memory is the means by which your past connects with the present to determine the way you're going to navigate your world. And so our pasts are different. Our brains may well be made up of the same material, but the impressions they've encoded as a consequence of our past are not the same. So that is. Memory and your memory of your past is what makes you you, and that's an important function of the brain.
So this actually brings up a new question. So how do we know free will exists? Because if everything that we're doing now is a result of what we did in our past, is some kind of summation of that, how do we say this is a free will and this is not just destiny and because of how our past was?
That's a great question, and an eternal question, meaning that there is no... so this is... I do teach a course here in the school that's it's called History and Systems. The systems is meant to cover systems of thought in psychology. And, we cover the roots of our discipline and how it is that we've come to think the way we do now. given the way we've thought, meaning the way we meaning in psychology at least. And so, there has always been a tension between a discipline like psychology where, yes, we're in a sense, yes, things like the mind and our ability to apparently exercise will and freedom of will over our behaviours, and consciousness being important as part of all that, and being potentially, in the words of William James, the executor of our free will. That's all what we'd like to believe, and that potentially makes us special.
Right.
But of course, science and scientific study of most things, including brain/mind, is predicated on determinism of a sort. As in, if what made you was your own unique history, and you had freedom of will to do what you want as when you want, then there'd be very little for a general discipline of whatever, psychology, neuroscience, that would be able, that would comment sensibly on that. So we appreciate that our behaviours are determined in some way, at least in some situations, by environment, by genetic predisposition, by a whole range of things. And the question of to what degree do we have free will and so on continues to occupy philosophers, and is an interesting question, to which I don't think that we'll ever have resolution, or maybe we have resolution and we don't want to agree. But I think the point is that in any school of psychology, even here, the question that you've asked, do we have freedom of will? Why do I have it? If not, why do I have a sense that I do? No two people, I don't think, in the school would necessarily give you the same answer, and that's because it's a complex question.
Right.
But yeah, I certainly feel like I had the freedom to say yes or no when you emailed, and to do this podcast, for example. But yeah, certain theorists over time in psychology have argued strongly in favour of, well, no, that sense of will is just it's an illusion, and really our decisions, our behaviours are all determined either from within or externally from without, but they're determined in some way, shape or form. I don't think I answered your question. I think I sort of gave you the terrain.
Because there is no definite answer, I think. Like, there is no definite answer to anything.
No, I think there's... and that's what makes things interesting. Like, the world is always more interesting when it's not black and white. Exactly. That it's either a yes or a no, but it's the shades of grey and the sorts of arguments people develop in favour of there being or not being and so on, and people's theories over time. Those are interesting, as opposed to whether there is a fixed eternal truth in the world that, this is how it is. Yeah, we don't know that.
So, this brings me to two questions. So first one, if I were to take a human being and somehow replicate the brain, every single memory, every single thing, and put it in another human being, and give them an option of maybe, like similar option to both of them, what will be the probability that they both choose the same option, because now they have the same processing unit?
Yeah, so if I had your brain, and I guess to what extent are all of our experiences that make us us, to what extent should they be identified exclusively with a brain, as opposed to all the rest of us too, which is probably there for good reason, as opposed to, well, your question is really, are my arms and legs and the rest of my body, is that really just a vehicle for my brain to get around in?
Exactly.
That's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good question. Maybe one day there will be. Maybe one day these sorts of things will be done unethically behind closed doors and be no longer the realm of sci-fi. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think if our brain is everything, and if our brain is really the controlling unit, then we will make the same choice. And if there is something higher than the brain that we cannot discover, then probably we won't.
I guess for me, I wouldn't think of it as segregated as that. I don't think of my my body is just a vehicle for transporting my brain, but obviously it's the means by which I receive sensory information from the world, right? And so whether that's sight, sound, taste, whatever else. So no, you can't just extract a brain, as in, is there a memory of all of that sensory stuff that exists not just within the thing between my ears, but also somewhere else in the various ways that I actually interact with the world. And so I guess I don't know. I guess no one knows. And I think it's an interesting and fun thought exercise. I don't know the answer. I think your brain and your body, as in in a way, the whole mind-body problem. To what degree is our mind ought it to be considered separately of our bodies? I mean, this is not that. You're asking about the brain and the body, which are all part of the physical. We can poke a brain in the same way as you can poke me in an arm. So I don't know. I never thought of it before, but it's fun to think about.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know.
So what would you say if I said that everything that's happening today, like every feeling and everything that I can do, is because of evolution? Do you agree with that, or was there something else? Is there something else to it?
And again, this is a response that ask different people, I give you different answers. But yeah, sure, I absolutely think that we've evolved and we are part of the natural world, and as part of the natural world, then the various ways in which you and I interact today, and the way that we as people we've come to be today, that's as a product of evolution, and the ways in which we've all adapted, and our forebears have adapted to their environments, and that adaptation is true for the physical forms that we've taken, but also for the ways that the brains have adapted to environments to solve problems and all of those things. Yes, I do think that evolution as a process of adaptation to the environment is what's made us us.
So this brings the question that why did evolution give us feelings such as depression, feeling emptiness without a purpose? Just like you said, grey areas are exciting. So why that feeling?
So there's various schools of thought on this, and so I referenced James once, and I'll do it again. William James. So his take on it was, he was driven to depression because of he essentially believed in freedom of the will and consciousness as the executor of the will, but also recognised that any scientific discipline called psychology was predicated on some form of determinism. And so for him it was a terrible tension. Okay, and so the question of why do we believe in will if there is no such thing, or if it's not in fact free, or why do we feel like we are conscious if we in fact aren't? And I guess for James it was, consciousness exists, that's the starting point, and only adaptive things exist. So consciousness is adaptive for some reason. Okay. However, others challenged James's ideas and said essentially, no, in fact, so perhaps that's best described what the tension for James is really one where, imagine that you and I, we're out in the wild and you see a bear. Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen a bear before, but I imagine it's easy to imagine. It's a terrifying experience. Okay, so the standard way. So the James essentially, he was depressed, but he was able to cure himself of his depression by actually acting outwardly in a way that was exactly contrary to the way that he felt. So he feels depressed, but you can recognise that if you act cheerfully, you smile, you do certain things that one would identify with a cheerful disposition, that in doing so, in acting in a certain way, those actions led to him essentially coming out of his depression. And so the insight that afforded James was that, hang on, the usual way of thinking about things, the way that still permeates a lot of even psychology and and elsewhere is that you see something like a bear, and that causes some sort of feeling, some internal emotion. Let's call it fear. Okay, you see the bear, you feel the fear, and as a consequence of fear, what that does is you then engage a series of behaviours to defend yourself. You presumably run away. Okay, and James's insight was no. Well, maybe that sequence is not quite correct. It's convenient to believe that I see something, there's some set of internal feelings that then are expressed outwardly in behaviour. But James, he challenged that and said, no, what happens is you see the bear and you get the hell out of there and you run. So there's the perception of state of affairs in the world that leads to some series of actions. And as a consequence of acting in the world, there's all of these various kinesthetic feedback that accompanies the action. And it's in fact that kinesthetic feedback that is resolved in consciousness as something like fear or something like the emotion that accompanies the behaviour. Okay? But there's an important shift there. So it's not see the bear, feel the fear, run away. It's see the bear, run away, and as an accompaniment to the running away, you have this internal feedback from all of the whole body action that's resolved as emotion. So for James, consciousness was something that was important. It was the executor of will, but his experiences and then theories led him to suppose that maybe consciousness wasn't an interface between the world, seeing the bear, and the way you act in the world, running away. Rather, consciousness was a correlate of behaviours that are expressed in the world. Okay, why am I banging on about all this? Because your question was why do we have consciousness, right? Why do we feel like that's an important thing? Okay, subsequent theorists extended James's ideas about emotion and applied it directly to consciousness. They said, look, it's not just about things like emotion. Anything that you would describe as a conscious experience is always preceded or accompanied by some set of behavioural actions or tendencies out towards the world. Okay, so what they argued was that in fact consciousness is your sense of will over your arrival here today for us to do this. It really is just a product of the close correlation between the kinesthetic feedback you receive from the behaviours you express in the world and then the full-bodied execution of those behaviours. So essentially, for this particular period, and a very early and important period in our history, consciousness, the answer to the question, why do we have consciousness? Why is it there if it's not important and functional in some sense? Was because, well, it's just an epiphenomenon. It's like other phenomena in nature. There are things that have evolved to exist for a purpose, and there are things that have also exist as a consequence of being correlated with something else that's important for our evolutionary history, like the behaviour. But consciousness is in fact just an epiphenomenon of our evolutionary history. It isn't really something that's there that mediates between the environment and our behaviour. Our behaviours are what's selected, and so that's one way of thinking and one way of answering your question, that in fact consciousness exists as an epiphenomenon, as it's a byproduct of the arrival into consciousness of all of the sorts of things that happen when we act in the world. So it's an epiphenomenon. That's one take on it. Others would give you a different take. I'm not even sure that's my personal take.
So what's your personal take?
That consciousness is ever present in terms of the way in the School of Psychology we have many different areas. We're a broad church, and certainly within the school there are people for which consciousness is the focus of their particular field of inquiry. And consciousness was what, in fact, at the very start of psycho, in 1879 was the first formal laboratory of experimental psychology generated in Germany by Wilhelm Wundt. And for him, psychology was going to be all about the study of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And that's the very stuff that consciousness was thought to. That was consciousness.
Right.
And so yeah, people. The way people think about consciousness has waxed and waned over time. It's gone to the point of why do we have it if it's not important in mediating will? Well, one answer is, well, it's perhaps an epiphenomenon of the things that are important for my survival and my existence here today, which is the way that I've acted outwardly towards the world. But yet, and for good reason, there is, we in psychology, we do think about the mind as being in some sort of interface between the environment and the way we act in the environment. And thinking, meaning, and understanding, and consciousness, and how the mind regulates those various things. That's different people, I guess, have different takes on it. And I work principally with rats and ask questions about how they solve very simple problems. And so that question doesn't come up in my day-to-day existence when dealing with rats. But perhaps it ought to. I don't know. So I don't know. It's for me, consciousness is yet another great mystery of the universe. And I think it spans the divide between philosophy and psychology, and it is a mystery for philosophers in the same way that it's a mystery for us in psychology, but it's a beautiful mystery.
Right. So, evolution obviously happens to make a living being better. Like, to give them a chance of better survival with the current situation. But the question is, there have been a lot of studies about consciousness and brain, and it says that this is actually not the best thing that evolution has come up with for survival. So I think what I'm getting to is, what is your view? Is there a soul that exists, or no, those are just wrong beliefs?
So I won't say. So I'll say two things. One is, I don't think evolution is it's not a process with direction towards betterment. As in, whether that's evolution of whatever the physical forms that we see in the world around us and throughout the animal kingdom, it's not like there's it's not progress towards, it's not improvement or betterment, but rather adaptation, right? So it's the physical forms that exist in the world today are those that have adapted to their particular ecological niches, and the forms that we don't see didn't. So it's not better or worse, but just suited, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So that's the first thing. So I don't have a sense. It's not like I don't think of us as being. I don't think of any species as being more evolved. We are not better or further advanced, I think, which is certainly not implied by evolution. Evolution isn't a linear chain of progress towards, and certainly not towards anything. It's just adapt, and it's the means by which we adapt. Okay. The second thing is the wrong beliefs part. I don't think there are any wrong beliefs, right? So some people have argued. So clearly one thing that probably is evident, I don't actually believe in absolutes, and I don't believe in right and wrong, and I don't believe in good and evil, and I don't believe in a lot of this food stuff that ultimately gives rise to something like I think there's probably correlations between people that do believe in dichotomies and then people that also then believe in something like a soul and so on. So I personally don't believe in the dichotomies, but and again, philosophers well before me, with much smarter than me, have also made the point that if the world isn't constructed in terms of absolutes and there's all just it's all relative, then look, are there beliefs that are right and wrong, or much like I just said, that the way that the physical forms you see in the world now are those that have been, were best served in the process of adapting to a particular ecological niche. Okay, you could make the same argument for beliefs. The beliefs that are pervasive in the world and often in competition with each other, are people right or wrong for holding the particular beliefs they have? Maybe, but really, people have argued, no, the beliefs that you hold and that I hold are simply those that have made my day and my experiences as an individual in the particular society in which I live, that they're an adaptation to my local environment in the same way that your beliefs are yours. So all we do is come to hold beliefs that basically make sense for us to hold. We hold beliefs that are adequate for us at any given moment in time. And beliefs are subject to change over time. As my experience as a member of the world changes, the sort of societies and communities I occupy, as they change, so too will my beliefs, because they are simply adaptations. But the question you've asked is, are they right or wrong in some sense? how do you answer that question? Well, maybe they're wrong in some sort of absolute sense, and we have now laws and regulations, and so societies agree on what's acceptable and not. But maybe that person just holds the beliefs that they do because they're surrounded by the people that hold those beliefs, and maybe it would be not in their interest to hold beliefs to the contrary in those communities because that wouldn't be adequate for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't believe. Yeah. So I don't believe evolution is a directed process towards betterment. And I don't believe that beliefs are right or wrong. I think you hold beliefs. The beliefs you hold are yet again evidence of the ways that we adapt to different types of environments. And so soul. Yeah, I don't believe in soul, but I have a moral code and compass, and that seems to operate just fine.
But doesn't that make us so insignificant? Like,
yeah, and isn't that? And I find beauty in that.
how?
Oh, because I think that for me, as in, yeah, so the idea of a soul that in fact is somehow special to us as people and then keeps us separate from essentially the rest of the natural world. In a way I can see how that's an alluring idea. But I don't actually find that sense of separation from the natural world all that comforting. And yeah, if there's no soul and nothing that then makes, it's not my soul that makes me different from you or special, it's actually just different histories that, whatever led to us being here today. I find the latter more interesting. As in, the idea that I am, whatever, just occupying a certain space for a certain time and that the world will go on without me. I don't know, I find comfort. I find comfort in that more so than that the things that clearly there's me as an individual, there's me as I have a family, there's the community in which I exist, and all of those are important to me. But whether I don't think of myself as, I don't find comfort personally in the idea that I'm somehow special as part of all of that, or special in the world, or anything like that. No, I find that, I don't know, that's, it's not, it's, personally, I'm comfortable with the idea of, no, I'm just part of the natural world, and I exist in it with everybody else, but I don't see myself as somehow special, apart, separated from it, and certainly not because I possess something called a soul.
But then how ethical is it to, like, there are research going on how to increase the lifespan, how to make brain special, like brain chips and everything. How ethical is that then?
Ethics is a good question, and so like I said, I do research with animals, so it's the sort of thing that's you think about every day. Not particularly with respect to what you just mentioned, so in terms of, even if you could, right, let's just say it's still sci-fi, but let's go there. Let's say you could implant some set of chips somewhere in the brain, and you're doing that because that somewhere in the brain was known to be the absolute ground zero for all manner of whatever. Let's just say depression for the minute. I guess that what stands behind that idea is that there's some single bit of the brain where that problem emerges, and so that's kind of this. It implies a very discretized view of the brain, and yet the brain is very complex and it consists in many parts, and different parts of the brain tend to support different functions. But the idea that you could specifically modulate some specific part of the brain and only have one consequence, which is to essentially alleviate someone's misery without there being any other consequence, if that's what our futures hold, that'd be fascinating and amazing, but I'm not sure that's what had happened.
So this remembers me of the story I read about SM, where she got her amygdala removed and she couldn't have the feeling of fear, but still they were able to get her to fear of some stuff, but not all of it. So is our brain divided into parts which give us specific functioning, or is it the whole brain working as a unit?
It actually suffered from Urbach-Wyeth disease, which is where you get a build-up of essentially you get the calcification in the amygdala, and essentially that causes the surrounding tissue to die, and it forms a natural and very localized lesion of the amygdala. And people with that disease do tend to, they do end up in dangerous situations or not recognize danger. And so, yes, and then one of the claims was that they didn't in fact experience fear, and that was then in some way important for them to then, that was why they ended up in dangerous situations. But yes, no, they can. I think you might be referring to the study where it was shown that when even people without an amygdala can experience something like fear, when I think it was the carbon dioxide concentration is increased dramatically, that does lead to a very acute response. And so I guess I think the reason why the amygdala has been important, and in the context of research under the banner of fear, and even I study the amygdala in my own work, and its importance for learning about things that signal danger and remembering things that signal danger, is because, it's been, the amygdala is part of a circuit that it essentially is important for recognizing and reacting to danger, and thereby defending yourself in the presence of danger. And so I guess the SM and what you've the person you've described and so on, the fact that they can experience fear, I think it was taken to mean that, there is a distinction between defense and the way you defend yourself versus something more like the panic state or emotion, like that's typically labelled fear. We have a lot of history. Amygdala is a very important area for many people, many researchers, and there is a current debate, and it's been discussed for a long time, when we're studying these types of things, particularly in animals who can't verbalise and tell you things, and you draw inferences only from the behaviours they express in a situation. The animal defends itself, and we're tempted to apply the label, it must be afraid.
Right.
But what it did was it defended itself. So we know the amygdala is important for defence. Whether the amygdala is additionally important for something like the fear that typically that you and I can verbalise and say we feel, that's up for grabs. So I think the case of SM is really further support for that point, that the circuits and systems of the brain that have been studied, and in the case of animals at least, shown to affect different aspects of their behaviour, like defence, it's affecting behaviour. But the labels that we use routinely in whatever describing human experiences, like complex emotions like fear, we don't know how they in fact are embedded in those circuitries, if at all. So the other part of your question was, how does the brain work? It is, there are different systems and circuits that support different functions, but it's very, very, and sometimes when we're even in undergraduate courses and we're talking about bits of the brain, we have a tendency to promote the idea that this bit of the brain does something in isolation, but it's really just a convenient, that's almost like it's not laziness, it's a heuristic, because you're giving these lectures or doing these podcasts in a certain amount of time. But no bit of the brain works in isolation, it's all connected. And different parts of the brain are connected in different ways for different reasons. So no part of the brain exists in isolation for a specific function. In isolation is, I guess, the bigger point that I was making.
Right. So I think just the final question for this podcast: why do we experiment like all of these things on rats? Do they have some similarities with how human brain works, or why only rats?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's a practical answer to it, which is practically. It's in terms of experiments with large numbers of subjects, which are needed for whatever experimental and research purposes, and statistical analyses require a certain amount of power, and a certain amount of power requires a certain number of such subjects. Have animals so they're small, they're easily housed, and they're beautiful to work with. But the other more important, not practical answer is, as a product of our, the mammalian brain, and so the systems that we've evolved to defend ourselves against danger, or indeed to navigate the world and find food, water, shelter when needed. So these aversive and appetitive systems, designed for defence and foraging. We hold these systems as a product of our evolutionary history, and some portion of that evolutionary history is shared with even the humble rat. And so the ways in which the sorts of defence and food, water, shelter, they're just so fundamental to the survival that they are in fact there very early in our evolutionary history. And it's as a consequence of that the rat makes an ideal model system to study these systems, defence and foraging, in isolation, but as well as how they interact. And so, yes, there is much to be gained from studying how those systems are encoded or wired into the brain, and that will inform the ways in which we defend ourselves, or not just the way we do it, but also pathologies that then exist. How can we think about those? If these are the sorts of, if this is our endowment as a consequence of evolution.
Yeah, wow. I mean, this really makes me wonder how alien intelligent species might be like, because that will give us a whole new perspective on how intelligence can develop. But yeah, wow. Thank you, Dr. Nathan.
No, it's my pleasure. I hope it's been interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and had a lot of fun.
Oh, good.
Thank you for coming to the show. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Hey, good job.
This was the end of the episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. This won't be our last episode with Dr. Nathan Holmes. In the next ones, we will dive a little deeper into how brain works and how it processes information. Until next time, thank you for watching.